Tripod, the official Trinity University Press podcast, invites authors, journalists, community leaders, and other guests to engage in exploratory, informative discussions on the subjects of people, places, and the planet. I'm Lily Brennan, and welcome back to another episode of Tripod, the official podcast of the Trinity University Press. Joining me today is Jennifer Case, a creative writing professor at the University of Central Arkansas, an assistant nonfiction editor at terrain.org, and prolific author of many subjects, including her book on the nature and politics of motherhood entitled We Are Animals. Jennifer is here today to discuss the concept of motherhood and parenting as an avenue to explore everyone's relationship to their environment and our global circumstances. Welcome, Jennifer Case.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad we could make this work over Zoom. Just to start things off, if you want to give a brief introduction to yourself.
Well, I think you described it well. I'm a writer. I have a background in environmental writing and specializing in creative nonfiction. I teach at the University of Central Arkansas, where I largely get to teach creative nonfiction courses. Otherwise, I have 2 kids, love to garden and hike and spend time outside and do all of those things.
Can you tell us a bit more about your experience working at the University of Central Arkansas and how you got into teaching?
Sure. Well, I was an English major as an undergrad, specializing in creative writing, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that after I graduated with my bachelor's, if I wanted to go into publishing or into teaching or into nonprofit arts administration. So I tried out a couple of things. I had an internship in book publishing towards the end of my undergrad. And then I went to grad school. And again, just to keep trying out and exploring options and things I could do with that major. But I fell in love with teaching. Teaching is where I really felt like my time was being used in a rewarding manner. And so I've been on that track ever since. And I was really grateful after I got my PhD to get the job at the University of Central Arkansas.
Gotcha. My brother's a teacher. He teaches English as well at the high school level in Minneapolis, where you grew up in Minnesota, right?
I grew up in Minnesota. Yeah.
He teaches at Minnetonka.
Yeah.
He loves it. But were you always doing writing? Was writing always a passion for you, or did that kind of come later?
I always loved to write. I remember writing ever since I was a young child. And so it's always something I did. I remember it was in 8th grade, though, where I really started to think I want to be a writer. Mm-hmm. And what happened was my 8th grade English teacher brought in his old journals. So journals he had kept as a child and young adult, and he read from them for us. And that was really inspiring for me. And I remember very distinctly sitting in his classroom, hearing him share his journals and thinking, that's what I want to do. I'm going to start journaling now specifically to try and enhance my writing skills. And I started to do that. I've kept a journal ever since and knew that I wanted to write in some capacity.
That's so cool. That takes a lot of bravery as a teacher.
Yeah. I'm sure they were carefully selected journal entries.
Yes, I would hope so. And in addition to, you've been writing since 8th grade, you decided you wanted to be writing, but the particular subjects you write on, can you kind of talk a bit about those and what draws you to those subjects?
Again, I have that background in environmental writing, and my family used to camp a lot when I was growing up, and I loved camping and being outside. So I was initially drawn to environmental writing and environmental literature. That's where I felt most at home. So a lot of my early work was about place and conceptions of home and our relationship to the natural and built environment. And that stayed with me. But as I've gotten older, I've also started to integrate other topics into my explorations of place and environment. So We Are Animals, for instance, is what happens when an environmental writer tackles motherhood, right? And how, as a person and a writer, I found myself exploring how motherhood affects relationships to place and how our environments affect our experience of motherhood and what it means to be a mammal and a biological creature who's giving birth.
Now that you've kind of mentioned We Are Animals, do you want to give a little bit of a summary about the TU Press publication you have?
My quick summary of We Are Animals, it's motherhood, feminism, and environmental biology, and the conflicts and intentions I experienced between those 3 things once I became a mother.
You cover a lot of different topics, and all of them are very easy to follow. There's a central storyline to it. So what was the audience, like the ideal audience for this book? Because I mean, I feel like I'm probably not the ideal audience, but I was definitely able to connect with it. I don't know if you had somebody in mind when you were writing it.
Well, a large part of my motivation was to make the argument that the issues that affect mothers and women of childbearing age are issues that everyone should care about, right? That they aren't just issues that only women who want to have children should know about or care about or be expected to research and discuss. So I did write the book with a pretty broad audience in mind. I think so often writing about motherhood gets pigeonholed as being only for women or only for mothers. And I wanted to push against that and try to explore this material in a way that made it clear that these are societal issues, not just issues for women or for those who have chosen to become parents and mothers. At the same time, I do realize it's a book that's going to resonate a lot more with women or people who have chosen motherhood. And so I recognize that audience and have found that readers do respond to it particularly well if they see themselves in some parallels with their own experiences. But I think a lot of our writing, probably the audience that propelled me when I was drafting this material was a younger version of myself, right? So in many ways, I was writing to the version of myself who, had just had her first child and later is struggling with conceptions of motherhood as she was expecting to become a mother of a second child. And what did she want to read, right? What was not available in the literature she was looking at and trying to offer that version of myself, the stories that I could have benefited from at that point.
On the subject of what your audience, what readers take away, I did want to kind of talk about the messages within this book for readers and kind of the larger takeaways. I guess you kind of already suggested that the bigger takeaway is like what your younger self, like what message you'd want to give them. Do you want to kind of expand on that, or what message do you hope readers take away from this book?
To me, the book is more a dismantling of messages than it's kind of a creation of a message. So when I first became a mother, I struggled with the societal conceptions of motherhood that exist around us. And I think they've only increased since I wrote this book. Honestly, there's so much kind of divisive discourse out in the world right now about what a mother should do or look like or be. And I struggled as a young mother because I didn't feel I fit that, right? Or I felt like motherhood had become a box that I needed to break out of, that was suffocating in some way. And yet, what is motherhood, right? How have my conceptions of motherhood perhaps limited what I thought I could or should experience in this role? Mm-hmm. So I used the book to explore those conceptions of motherhood and unpack them and kind of trouble them in relation to evolutionary biology and physiology and what we know of the human embodied experience. So my hope is that the book as a whole, helps mothers realize how normal their experiences are, even if they don't fit kind of this idealistic expectation or message or image we have out there about motherhood, and also to just trouble society's perspectives and depictions of motherhood and show that it's more complicated and messier than we'd like it to be or would like to believe it is. And yet that is motherhood too.
It wouldn't be a in route that I would normally think of to approach these bigger topics. But again, I think that poetry, like the poetic background of like, what is a large metaphor that I can use to talk about these subjects? And it didn't feel metaphoric. It felt very real and very tangible, but I could see like that through line through all the subjects you bring in, political and mental health wise, and the idea of like the mothering community having these like weights on it of like these expectations, which I guess I'll definitely get into more as I move through the rest of the questions. But I know one of the themes that came up, or at least something that I was certainly connecting with, was the idea of control and agency. I know early on in the book, you talk about the kind of a fear of like losing control of, well, how your body is reacting. And like certainly in the moment of delivering a baby, like how limited that control is, but then also how important choice is and how important agency is. Do you want to maybe expand a little bit on that sort of dichotomy between like, and the animalistic nature of like, when we have those moments of just being in
Yeah.
our bodies, how we don't have to worry so much about the
Yeah.
control aspect.
Well, I definitely see the book as a meditation of control and choice in relation to reproductive options and health and reproductive justice. So one of the questions I grappled with a lot when writing the book and through my experience of motherhood is what is control of reproduction, right? And there are so many ways that we talk about reproductive control as empowering, right? Kind of the need for women to have choice and control over their reproductive decisions and their reproductive health. And yet there are also these moments in life where surrendering and giving up control is actually quite empowering too, right? And I saw the conflict between those two things in my experience of motherhood, where with my second child, I felt I had lost control and lost agency and lost choice. And this was at the exact same time in our nation, right, where women are losing choice and control over some of the reproductive options available to them. And so I saw my reality reflected in what was happening and is happening nationally. And yet, giving birth, like the actual process of giving birth, was a loss of control, but a very different loss of control, right? Yeah. It was me giving up control to my body, which seemed to know what it was doing. And so I was really interested in, well, when is control an empowering concept, right? Or an empowering choice? And also, when is control actually something that's healthy to give up, right? When is kind of giving up our human conception of control over the universe maybe not useful, and it's stopping us from experiencing, some more powerful force in the world and just being connected to the world in a different kind of way. So I think these essays really grapple with that question, right? Those different kinds of ways of experiencing choice and control, especially in relation to motherhood and childbirth.
Enjoying the conversation with Jennifer Case? Check out her book, We Are Animals, on the nature and politics of motherhood, available for purchase on the Trinity University Press website and anywhere you buy books. Use Tripod's discount code, ANIMALS20, to save 20% on your purchase of We Are Animals at tupress.org. Another aspect of that, on the emotional level, I think, is the choice to be compassionate and authentic, which is certainly another large part of the book, is that search for community, but also just like that somebody understands what you're going through. And I feel like there's kind of a lack of that in a lot of communities right now and amongst people. What do you think gets like in the way of that, and how can people remind themselves to be compassionate?
I think it's a lot of fear at the moment that's getting in the way of our ability to be compassionate, right? And this kind of increasing divisiveness and polarization of society, where we're clinging to our particular conceptions or our particular views rather than interacting with each other as humans, right? And just being humble and honest about our experiences, and being humble and willing and curious enough to listen to the experiences of others. And I know with We Are Animals, one of my goals for the book was to talk about motherhood in a way that hopefully bridged some of those divides. I don't know if that happened, but it's a goal of mine, right? That motherhood and so many of the conversations we have about motherhood are polarized, right? Are you someone who wants an unmedicated birth, or someone who really advocates for, you're going to use all of the interventions you can? And it kind of pits women against each other and implies, you're going to take sides and you're going to be defensive and fearful and aggressive if you're interacting with someone who has made very different choices from you. And that applies to politics too, right? Where we have kind of this conservative perspective of motherhood and then a so-called more liberal or progressive perspective of motherhood. And really, so many women actually share the same fears and concerns and questions about what motherhood looks like today. And I wanted to create a space for those conversations to take place and hopefully show how some of our concerns are much more shared than we might predict.
Yeah, I think you successfully covered all of that in the book, the things you're like, I'm not sure that's that, but totally. And I think in the beginning, you do a great job of explaining the inner thought of like a mother, before delivering or after, of feeling judged perhaps by
Mhm.
other mothers, or just like that everybody feels a bit shameful about things,
Yeah.
of that experience isn't openly talked about. Like
Mhm.
all the nitty-gritty of like, yeah, my body's doing weird things right now.
Yeah.
And like I don't know if it's normal. I don't like all that. I think that translates on so many levels to how people feel about certain conversations going on right now. Just like, do I need to be worried about that? Am I a bad person if I'm not
Yeah.
concerned with that or doing something about that?
Mhm.
And you're just kind of apprehensive to talk to somebody that you think might have an opposing opinion.
Yeah.
And I really liked, you have a quote in there of people being more compassionate and empathetic toward the invisible anguish of others.
Yeah.
I really liked that because I think that ties in so much of the mental health aspect as
Mhm.
well. Did that come from anywhere in particular, like that message of like invisible anguish?
The line is in the essay where I'm exploring prenatal and postpartum depression. And, increased compassion is definitely one of the gifts of going through a period of personal struggle, right? So
Right.
the most challenging experience regarding mental health I've had was when I was pregnant with my son and then postpartum after. And so I
Mhm.
really suffered quite a bit with postpartum and prenatal depression. And yet, the gift of that experience, or one of the things I gained from growing through that experience, was just realizing how intense inner anguish can be, right? And internal suffering and internal struggle, and realizing that I felt invisible and alone in my own struggle, which also means other people also feel
Yeah.
invisible and alone in their struggle, right? And so often we aren't aware of what's happening in other people's heads, and what they're working through and struggling with. And having compassion for that and realizing how connected we are in those ways. And it grew my ability to be compassionate, in fact. And for that, I'm thankful.
How do you think, without going through an experience like that, if you haven't endured sort of a challenge in that
Mm-hmm.
way, how do you think people can gain that perspective on what somebody else might be going through?
I mean, talking to people, right?
Mhm.
Listening to people's stories is a great way to learn about others' experience. And I think that's the work of literature too. So
Yeah,
reading, right? Reading wonderful poems or novels or essays or memoirs. This is the stuff of life, right? And that's what writers use to craft the work that they produce. So, a wonderful way to get to know other people's experiences, especially the kinds of experiences that we might not personally have a lot of experience with, is, yeah, seeking them out and reading them. And it's a real easy, safe way to introduce ourselves to others'
yeah,
perspectives.
I totally agree. Obviously, both of us of the same mind, but wanted to kind of get into place and community
Mhm.
as a theme of the book. And towards the beginning of the book, you describe yourself as a place-based advocate, which I
Yep.
hadn't really heard before. But can you kind of talk about what that is and how you see it as being important?
That phrase comes out of place-based philosophies and place-based thinking, and work by, Scott Russell Sanders and Wendell Berry and all of these writers from the last couple of decades, who really work to help us value the places we're from, right? And the places we're living, the geography and the social history of that region and the politics of that region, and the weather of that region, and understanding all those layers of place, and honoring and valuing our relationship to the places where we live or come from, and our ongoing dependence and relationship with them. And so, as a place-based advocate, right, I want to write work that helps us not just walk through our landscapes or terrains as if they're kind of just the backdrop of our life, but really pay attention to what we see around us, and live fully in those locations and appreciate what they give us and our relationship with them. So that's where I started from, and it's certainly still a value in my life and my work.
Trinity University Press is a mission-driven publisher committed to civic engagement with timely ideas facilitated by the publication of print and digital books, related media, creative and educational programs, and other activities that help us all better understand our place in a crowded world. For more than 50 years, Trinity University Press has published more than 225 titles and organized thousands of events, all focused on broadening our understanding of many impactful subjects, from human relationships with our physical environments to social equity and justice. For more information about Trinity University Press, visit tupress.org. I think there is a decrease in sort of neighborly and community-oriented people, or not maybe people. I think all
Mm-hmm.
people want that, but there seems to be a lot of obstacles. Do you see any kind of reasoning as to this, or what is the negative impact of not having that community?
Yeah. Well, so often through human history, that's where our community comes from, right? It's the
Mhm.
people we interact with and live with within our communities. And I do think there's a lack of that, or kind of a loosening of community ties. And I'm hoping that will change. But I recognize where I live right now, I don't actually talk to most of my neighbors, right?
Yeah.
Many of them, I don't even know their names. I just wave, right, when taking a
Mhm.
walk or driving past them. And I don't think that's entirely unusual for many people today. And yet it does impact, what kind of community we feel in the cities or the towns where we live, and how devoted or committed we are to our neighborhoods and the towns where we live, and kind of that sense of, commitment and being part of that community.
I liked the quote that you had of a valued person lives in a society in which her story has a place. Do you think that your story has found a place amongst like the genre, or do you think you're in a place where your story belongs?
I do. I know, when my daughter was born, she's 12 now. So that was a while ago at this
Yeah.
point. There wasn't a lot of literature out there that offered real depictions of motherhood. And so I didn't feel then that my story had a place or would be valued in conversations about motherhood or the literature of motherhood. But I do think that's shifting. And I'm grateful that this book exists. And I hope it's offering that space and that value for others. And I also really admire a lot of other work being written right now about motherhood. So I do think that our cultural understanding of motherhood is hopefully growing. I think
Yeah.
that's happening in certain areas, at least in literature.
Yes. Certainly in I would agree with that. But to move on to the planet kind of aspect, kind of just more meaning our more global community. I keep quoting you, but there were so many great lines I couldn't like help but write them down. But one of them is we can work more purposefully as a society to strengthen our physical communities and support local networks. I
Yeah.
was just kind of curious what that looks like to you, and what would the steps be to make that happen in your mind?
Well, so there I'm talking about motherhood in particular, right? So in hunter-gatherer societies, there would be a baby, and then there would be a community of people helping to take care of
Yeah.
that baby and that mother, right, who's taking care of the baby. So one baby would have, many adults around helping to raise them. In our society, that's almost reversed, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of our cultural depictions of motherhood, it's a mom alone at home, right, with
Yeah.
1 to 2 to 3 kids, and she's a stay-at-home mom, or she's largely responsible for taking care of them before work or after work, right? And there's a dad too, or another partner, and yet that's kind of our depiction. Suddenly it's one adult, maybe 2 adults, and then a
Right.
handful of kids. And that's just not sustainable. And it's not what humans evolved to do when it came to raising youth.
Yeah.
And so I would, I don't know how the policies would have to change, but I'd love to see how we respond to mothers, or how we raise children, starting to shift to where it looked closer to the hunter-gatherer norm from our evolutionary past, where
Yeah.
there's just more interactions between community members, right? Where it's expected that others would help.
Just a real physical community, not so
Yeah.
much like there's great online communities, but
Yeah.
the idea that it shouldn't be so hard to reach out to your
Yeah.
community and create a network if there
Yeah.
isn't one that already exists. I think that's
Exactly.
a great take on that question of kind of what would you do to create those more integrated networks.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of scenarios you ask the reader to imagine about
Mm-hmm.
these kind of global, largely like large scale political kind of questions. And one of which being how the world would be if kind of our ideologies, all of the things we sort of base, I know when you mentioned it, it was specifically related to motherhood and how
Yeah.
we would describe motherhood if we didn't have our current constructs
Mm-hmm.
gender-wise, religious-wise, socioeconomically,
Mm-hmm.
all of that, what would that look like?
Yeah.
What do you think is kind of the purpose of that exercise? And do you think it's kind of beneficial on other fronts?
I think it's beneficial on all fronts. Yeah.
Yeah.
To think about what conceptions do we have about this issue or the experience, and in what ways are those conceptions maybe actually interrupting, right, or limiting our actual experience, right? How might our conceptions be forming kind of this gauze or this filter between us and reality, and preventing us from just experiencing lived reality as it is?
Yeah.
I think that's an important question and a really interesting question. And project of the book was to lift those lenses, right? Or scrape away at those concepts to try and see, well, what's actually real?
There is sort of a repeated phrase and message in the middle to the end of the book of just how do you learn to care for something and have love for something that you maybe didn't feel prepared for or have that control in. And I saw that translating to kind of like, how do we love a world or a community or a culture that maybe doesn't want to care for us or doesn't fit our ideas? Do you have any kind of advice through your experience of how to overcome that feeling?
Well, there are two tensions in the book that I think are good examples of that. So the first, which relates to the line you quoted, is with my son, right? So my son was an unintended pregnancy. And when I was pregnant, I very viscerally knew that I hadn't wanted him, right? This was a pregnancy. I hadn't wanted him. So that's the question I kept asking myself that one of the essays tackles. How'd you approach a child you didn't want, right? How'd you come to love a child you didn't want? And then the second question or example from the book is with my husband, right? So a lot of the conflict or tension for me with my son was that we were unexpectedly pregnant. I didn't really want to follow through with the pregnancy. My husband, however, did, and felt that terminating the pregnancy would be immoral, right? And so we had this very strong marital conflict in that moment.
Yeah, of course.
And it took a long time for us to get over that, right? Or to resolve it to a way that felt safe and smooth and fully resolved again. And with both of those questions, right, these kind of really weighty, knotted, emotional questions, the approach I found I had to take was just to continually be open to reality as it was, right? So honoring whatever emotions I felt in the moment and not judging them or shaming them, but just accepting reality as it was in that moment, and yet still continually moving forward kind of in an open-minded way just to see what might happen, right? So not to make any final decisions about any future relationship, right? But just to say, this is the moment as it is. This is how I feel as I am right now, right? And yet I'm just going to be in this reality and accept it as it is and make the best decisions in the moment that I can. And I do think that is useful in broader context, right? If we're considering, feeling alienated from society, or like we're in a world that doesn't love us back, right? Or is maybe openly antagonistic towards us at some point, right? Well, what can we do about it? Maybe not always a lot, right? And yet it's the reality as it is in that moment, right? So finding ways to ground ourselves and be open and accept our own experiences and emotions, and yet also remain curious and open to what could happen.
That was my last question, but thank you so much. Your answers were fantastic.
Well, you have some great questions. I really enjoyed this. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for joining Jennifer and I for another episode of exploring people, places, and our planet with Tripod. Come back soon.